Yes, I'm Neil Riddell of the Altoona Mirror, managing editor, and I'm surrounded by two of our all-time great reporters. Just so much history here with Phil Ray on my right and Bill Kibler on my left. Thank you, fellas, for being here as we mark our 150th anniversary of the Mirror. Just incredible. June 13th, 1874, the Slepp family. Phil, the fact that you're, by my math are here on about 40% of that time. When you arrived here
yes, you're right.
in 1965. And, I tell people that I think you've written probably more byline stories than anybody in Pennsylvania newspaper history. And we've been really blessed. How about some of your early memories, Phil, how you got to the Mirror and just what it was like back then?
Well, this is my 59th year with the Altoona Mirror.
Keep going, man.
I was working in Pottstown for the Pottstown Mercury, and I didn't really like what I was doing because you'd come into your desk every afternoon, and there'd be 3 or 4 stories you had to do. I wanted my own beat in the worst way, so I kept applying to the Altoona Mirror, and I had a friend in Bellefonte, where I'm from, who knew J.E. Holsinger. And he set up an interview, and I came up here, and he hired me on the spot.
You were a Penn State grad, right?
Penn State grad, yeah, and graduate work at the University of Missouri. I got hired, and then my desire to have my own beat happened almost immediately, because the City Hall reporter, Rita Arminas, married the city solicitor, Jack Cazanet.
How about that?
And they went on a 2-month honeymoon.
She had a conflict of interest going right away.
The Mirror said, we don't have anybody to send up there. Jim Schaefer might have been the guy that they would send up, but he was having, I think, a feud with City Hall. So they sent me. And so I got to meet, Mayor Prosser, Bill Stauffer, all the city councilmen that got in the city government right off the bat. And I just loved it.
And in those days, the Mirror was an afternoon paper.
Yes.
We were 8 columns wide. If you look, it was really wide. Phil would have usually, 3 bylines a day.
I had as many as 7.
And we were an afternoon paper. So talk about how you, what your process was. Your reporting was in the morning.
Well, yeah, I'd come to work around 6:30 in the morning. We'd work until, deadline was noon as far as I was concerned, and work a little bit in the afternoon and go home.
Right.
However, I started to go to an awful lot of meetings, night meetings. I started covering townships, not only the city. I was on City Hall, townships, boroughs. I'd go to the NAACP meetings. I got into civil rights that way, and I had the fortune of going down to cover Resurrection City in Washington, and but that thing that I could have my own beat, because I wanted to dig. I wanted to go after the news that I thought was important. And,
so you were developing sources.
Oh yeah,
that's what you do on your own beat.
Yeah.
If you send a different person to a meeting to the same city council, if you send a different person every week or every month, they don't have a fighting chance to get to know the newsmakers and to try to build some trust. Now, Bill, you took a different tact on your road to becoming a reporter. Tell us about that.
Well, I majored in literature and philosophy at Juniata College, and I graduated in 1975. I'm 70 years old now. And I wanted to be a writer, but I had no interest in being a newspaper reporter. I wanted to write poetry or a novel. I wanted to write something.
You're still trying to do that.
Yeah, right. I wanted to write something that people would study in school, like kids would study in high school. And I tried that for a while, but it didn't work out because I didn't have to do it. Nobody made me do it, and I wasn't practical about it. And I never made plans to sell it so much. Anyway, I worked in restaurants, and I lived in Boston for a while as a start to become a writer. I left and came back to Philadelphia, where I'm from originally, or near Philadelphia. And I worked in restaurants, and eventually I came to Altoona to live and worked as a bartender. And then I hitchhiked around the country and then back and forth across the country. And then I settled in Altoona. That's...
You had family here, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I did. My dad's from here. Anyway, I ended up working in construction for about 9 years. And I thought in 1988, after I had gotten married, that I was fired because I had an argument with the boss. Turned out I didn't get fired, but my wife said, "Why don't you do something you went to college for?" And I thought, I could become a newspaper reporter.
Yeah.
And this is March of '88, and the owner of the company called on Monday. It had been Friday, and said, "Where are you?" And I said, I thought Tony fired me. And he said, no. I said, well, I kind of made my decision to go on to just do a different thing, And he said, good luck. And I thought I'd possibly get working in a sizable paper, but it turned out that after several months, I was able to get a job only in a very small paper, the Morrison's Cove Herald. Worked there for a couple of years, and I got a job in the Bedford Gazette, worked there for 3 years. But it's a 45-minute drive both ways, and my wife said, I'm going to leave you if you don't stop working there, because I was gone most of all the time. We had two young kids. I had a contact. Somebody gave me a contact with one of the Holsingers who was in charge of the Shopper's Guide in Everett, who hooked me up with the Mirror as a stringer. And
now, a stringer is somebody that is paid by the story. It's not a lot of our full-time writers, produce 2-3 stories a day, or they're working on things every day. A stringer is sent to a meeting and they're paid for that story.
I got $50 for a front page story, $25 for an inside story, $25 for a picture that got in the paper. You got no expenses. And my beat,
right,
insofar as it was, ended up in Huntington, which is 45 minutes away. So things were difficult. 3 years later, I got hired as a staff writer, and just like Phil, I immediately was sent to cover the city government. Became the City Hall reporter. That's what I still am.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Yeah. City Hall's a fascinating place at times. At times, I don't know what it's like now, but
so.
You've been here since 1998, and wow. So and it's well over 25 years. What have been favorite stories that you like doing? Because you do a little bit of everything. You do a lot of everything.
Yeah, I like the daily stuff. I find it's a lot easier for me to do the daily stuff, the straightforward stuff where you can summarize what the story's about in 3 paragraphs at the top. I find feature writing much more difficult. It's rewarding when you can master it and get it done, but it's harder. So it's less straightforward. It was interesting covering the Seifert case, the murder case.
Yeah.
That ended up.
Yeah, you went down to Maryland for that case.
I went down to Maryland and then to Virginia Beach.
A terrible tragedy.
Yeah.
And you've covered.
Yeah, we shared that. Remember, we alternated going down to.
Yeah, you'd go down one day, you go down one day, and
was that Rockville, right?
We won an award for that story. Remember?
Yeah, we've been blessed. There's been so many people in our newsroom that have been recognized by the Pennsylvania Newspaper Association or the Golden Quills. But Phil, speak to that when you're covering, murder or tragedy in a local community. Just just the emotions that brings.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the word emotions, because I have very deep emotions for many of the cases that I covered. I can't tell you how many murder cases I've covered, but I know I've covered at least more than 20 death penalty cases. And some of these were gruesome, awful murders. And every time I think about them, I can get emotional. Particularly like a mother who buried her daughter, and a father who buried his daughter. And, I had a lot of relationships with victims, family victims on these cases. And I get very emotional.
Very difficult. I went with you. One of the worst cases was the shooting in El Dorado, the subway that took the young garlic boy.
Oh, yes. The other case I think you became involved in was the former prisoner that killed a young boy in Tyrone. I remember that.
Yeah.
You were involved. That was one of your first cases.
Right, and I leaned on you and our news staff because there was a question. This was just heart-wrenching things. The mother had been a rape victim, and we don't identify rape victims.
Right.
And yet then there was the murder, and you felt strongly that the boy needed a voice, which was his mother's voice. So we made the decision because she already had been identified as a murder victim, and then some other information came out, the details and whatnot.
Very, very tragic case, yeah.
Just speak to the kind of compassion you've covered fire victims, Bill, that you show up, you don't know what to expect, and the compassion that you need as a reporter.
For what it's worth, I don't usually get too emotionally involved in stuff I report on, other than maybe in a generalized sense, things like efforts to help homeless people, things like that, like the recent reporting I did on the homeless, efforts to help homeless people with
you've been very
nighttime. Otherwise, I guess I don't take it too personally.
Well,
I'm not saying I'm proud of that, but I don't.
I've seen bodies and awful things like that, and I become very emotional.
Yeah, one of the things that a newspaper does is give a voice to people that may not have it.
Yeah, I think that's an important aspect of it. The people who are, I don't necessarily think that I follow through on it as much as I would like to think I ought to. When people are held in contempt by society, then I think it's one of the roles of newspapers to give them a voice and to push back on that somewhat. Whole classes of people. The news, I think, is sometimes guilty of, news in general, sometimes guilty of promoting the opposite of that.
Phil, going from really dictating in the morning because you're on deadline to, basically reading your story, writing notes yourself longhand and dictating in the early years, to now, using word processors and whatnot, and even posting things on the internet.
See, like my deadline was at noon for court stories and stuff like that. I would come out of the court and pick up a telephone, and I would just start dictating to poor Brenda Deal. Brenda Deal, she was not Brenda Carberry. And Esther Barnes. Yeah. Even Tim Doyle. They had assigned somebody to take these stories over to telephone. What I would do was write a lead, and then I would just go from there.
A lead is your introductory paragraph.
And I just go from there on the telephone.
Did you have a problem like making it coherent?
My young mind didn't. My old mind would have an awful problem. But no, I was able to do it, and we did it every day. And the way I understand it, sometimes the editors would wait to get the paper because it was maybe a high-profile murder case or something. They would wait, and the poor typists had to type that stuff, and they would pull it right out page by page and set it up.
Yeah.
But what has changed, of course, is the electronics. And now you have the telephone. We used a pager for a while.
Scanner.
Scanner.
How do you feel you've made that adjustment? I mean, because you have.
Yeah, well, I have, but I'm certainly anything but an electronic whiz. I got to go to, when my story disappears on the computer, I got to go, hey, how can I get this back? Stuff like that.
Well, I mean, now there's, the younger generation, of course, everything's a little shorter. They're tweeting, posting things and whatnot. Because of our senior group, we haven't challenged that many of our older reporters to do it in that kind of fashion. We're still very print focused. How do you feel you've adjusted, Bill?
Essentially, I don't do social media. Occasionally, I refer to Facebook for information on a topic. If it's
you use a computer a lot.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say, I think
that I don't do.
When I started at the Morrison's Cove Herald, we had a typewriter for about a month, and then they went to computers at that time.
Mm-hmm.
The way I write stories, I have to write a lead maybe 15, 20 times before I'm satisfied with it, and it's much easier to write it, copy it, put it at the top, and tweak it a little bit, and then just repeat that process until you have it right. And it's much harder to do when you have to cross out stuff on a piece of paper, and it's like much easier.
Yeah, I remember my early days, you would write it out or you type it out. That was even before I had an electric typewriter.
Oh, yeah.
And then you had an orange copy pencil, and you'd be making all kinds of editing changes to yourself and to whoever you submitted it to. So the computer cleaned up a lot of that copy.